Why did 130 children vanish from Hamelin and never return? Let me take you back, not just in time, but into the bones of a town that once pulsed with fear. The year was 1284. The town of Hamelin sat in Lower Saxony, Germany, along the banks of the Weser River. On the surface, it was like any other small medieval town. Cobblestone streets, half-timbered houses, a bustling marketplace. People lived simply, working as traders, farmers, and craftsmen. Children ran through the streets, their laughter echoing between the stone walls. The church bell rang every hour, and life, for the most part, followed a predictable rhythm. But under that surface, something darker festered. If you visit Hamelin today, you'll see it. The oldest buildings, the reconstructed towers, and the small plaques quietly reminding you. On June 26th, 1284, 130 children disappeared from this very place. And they were never seen again. Not kidnapped. Not murdered, just gone. No bodies were found, no witnesses came forward, no one ever claimed to know where they went. And even more chilling, none of the surviving adults dared to talk about it. In fact, for centuries, there was an unspoken rule in Hamelin: never mention the children, never speak of the piper, never question the silence. The story you know, the one about the Pied Piper, a man in colorful clothes who played a magical pipe and led rats away, might seem like a fable, a bedtime story. But it didn't start as a fairy tale. It started as a recorded fact. The earliest known written reference comes from a stained glass window in the church of Hamelin, built around 1300, less than 20 years after the event. The window showed a man in multicolored garments playing a pipe, while rows of children followed him. No rats, no fantasy, just loss. That window is gone now, destroyed centuries ago. But reports of its design survive in old manuscripts, and carved into the walls of the town itself are words that still send shivers down the spine. In the year of 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, by a piper, clothed in many colors, 130 children born in Hamelin were seduced and lost at the place of execution near the Koppen Hill. That's not a bedtime story. That's an official town record. So, what happened? And who was the man in the colorful clothes? Let's look at what we know. In the years following the disappearance, Hamelin went silent. The town fell into a kind of grief-stricken haze, families with empty cradles, parents who aged too fast, and strange new rules: no dancing on June 26th, no weddings, no celebrations, and most hauntingly of all, one of the streets in Hamelin was renamed. It was the street where the children were last seen. Today, it's still called Bungelosenstrasse, which literally means street without drums. To this day, no music is allowed to be played there. Think about that. 7 centuries later, and this town still refuses to play a single note of music on that one stretch of stone. Because of what happened. Because they still remember. And because no one knows why. Now let's go deeper. Was there really a man with a pipe? Did he hypnotize the children? Was he magical? Or just clever? Or was he something else entirely? There are theories. Plenty of them. Some believe the Pied Piper was a metaphor. Others believe he was real. But not what we think. Some say he was a recruiter. Some say he was an abductor. Some say he was death itself. And the truth might be darker than any version you've ever heard. Because Hamelin wasn't just mourning, it was hiding something that has never been explained. And as we follow the trail of those missing children, through old roads, forgotten texts, and whispered legends, we might not find a happy ending. But we'll find the truth, or what's left of it. Because in the next chapter, we dig into the oldest surviving documents, the broken families, and the moment a stranger arrived, playing a tune no one could forget, even 700 years later. The day he arrived, no one saw where he came from. There were no horses, no carriage, no traveling companions, just a tall man standing at the town gate of Hamelin, dressed in garments unlike anything the townspeople had ever seen. Stripes of crimson, emerald, and gold shimmered down his sleeves. His hat curled into a strange shape, like a flame frozen mid-dance. And on his back, a pipe, long, curved, and polished. He called himself nothing. He gave no name. But he made an offer. Hamelin, at the time, was in crisis, not just from plague or poverty, but rats. They were everywhere, gnawing through food stores, infesting bakeries, scurrying over beds at night. The town was overrun. And this man, this colorful stranger, promised to solve it. He said he could rid the town of rats, not with poison, not with traps, but with music. The townspeople laughed at first. So did the mayor. But laughter in desperation is cheap. So they made a deal. He would drive the rats out. In return, they would pay him 1,000 guilders, a fortune, but worth it if it worked. And then he played. It wasn't music the way we think of it. No melody you could hum. It was sharp, winding, strange. Some said it sounded like whistling wind through the bones of a crypt. Others said it made the hair on their arms rise, as if something ancient had been awakened. And the rats followed him. Out of houses, out of holes, out of sewers, by the hundreds, by the thousands. They poured into the streets like black water, not frenzied, calm, as if under a spell. The man walked, the rats followed, down the streets, through the gates, toward the river. And when he reached the Weser, he walked to the water's edge and played his final note. The rats, one by one, dove in and drowned. Every last one, and the town exploded in celebration. Church bells rang. Flags flew. People wept in joy. And when the piper returned to collect his payment, they turned him away. They told him it had only been a joke. They said he'd be lucky to get 50 guilders. They mocked him for believing the promise. And that's when he changed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just looked at them and said, "You'll regret breaking your word." Then he walked away. 3 days passed. On June 26th, while the townspeople were at church, the piper returned. But this time, he did not play for rats. He played for children. One by one, they came out of their homes, eyes blank, feet light, some still in their nightclothes, some holding toys, none speaking. They followed the sound of his pipe, through the marketplace, past the same town gate, and into the mountains. Parents watched in horror, but could not move. Something held them in place, some invisible weight, like their feet were nailed to the ground. Voices died in their throats. The children disappeared. Some said into a cave. Others said into a forest that was never there before. Some said the mountain itself opened and swallowed them whole. Only 3 children were spared. One was blind and couldn't follow. One was deaf and didn't hear the music. And one was lame and couldn't keep up. They are the ones who told the tale. But here's where things get stranger. There are no mentions of rats in the earliest versions of this story. None. The rat part? That was added hundreds of years later. So, if there were no rats, what did the piper really take revenge for? Why was he even there? Some believe the rats were invented to soften the truth, to give people something easy to swallow. A villain, a cause, a reason. But if you strip the tale back to its bones, you're left with one thing. A mysterious man came to town. The town crossed him, and then 130 children were never seen again. And no one, not then, not now, has ever found out where they went, or why. And maybe the better question is, what did the townspeople do that they were too ashamed to admit? Because this isn't just a mystery, it's a cover-up. And in Section 3, we follow the trail of exile, colonization, and one chilling theory, that the children weren't taken, they were sold. What if the music was just a distraction? What if the piper wasn't a magician or a monster, but a messenger? And what if Hamelin wasn't the victim? Let's look at the facts. Buried, obscured, forgotten over centuries, but never quite erased. In the 1200s, Europe was expanding, fast. New territories were being claimed across Eastern Europe and the Baltic coast. The Holy Roman Empire was pushing eastward into what we now call Poland, Transylvania, Hungary. It was called the Ostsiedlung, the Eastern Settlement. And guess what they needed? People, settlers, youth, workers, builders, and recruiters. Yes, recruiters. Men who would travel from town to town, looking for able-bodied young people to relocate and repopulate new regions for German lords. Sometimes these men were priests, sometimes soldiers, sometimes mercenaries. They dressed brightly, spoke well, promised land and fortune. To the poor, they were salvation. To the powerful, they were tools. To parents, they were temptation. Now here's the part that will make your stomach drop. Some researchers believe the Pied Piper wasn't a legend at all, but one of these recruiters. A man hired to quietly take Hamelin's youth and send them east, to live, to work, to disappear. Not stolen, given away. And the parents, they agreed. But when the deed was done, when the children were gone, and the consequences came creeping back, what would you do if you were them? You'd rewrite the story. You'd bury the guilt. You'd say it wasn't your fault. You'd invent rats and magic and music. Because rats are easier to blame than your own greed. Music is easier to believe than regret. But there's more. In a 15th century manuscript called the Lüneburg Chronicle, there is a chilling entry. In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, a stranger came to Hamelin and led away 130 children, born there, to Transylvania, where they settled. Transylvania. That's not fiction. That's a recorded account from a church document. And here's the kicker. Even today, in parts of Romania, there are villages that speak an old dialect of German. People there still tell stories of ancestors who came from far away, led by a stranger, villages whose surnames trace back to Saxony, oral histories that describe a journey through mountains, led by music and promise. Coincidence? Or confirmation? Some say the children were recruited, others say they were trafficked, and a darker few believe it was a sacrifice, a trade, a debt repaid, because Hamelin had sins and secrets it wanted to bury. And maybe the children were the price. Here's what we do know. There is no mass grave. There are no bones. There is no record of war, fire, disease, or natural disaster. The children simply vanished, as if the earth swallowed them, as if someone wanted them erased, and the only thing that remains is a melody, a man in stripes, and silence, because centuries later, Hamelin still walks carefully around the memory. No music played on that street. No celebration on June 26th. And the town's oldest documents, the ones written closest to the event, are locked in archives, fragile and fading. But before we accept the theory of recruitment or exile or sacrifice, we have to face one more question. What if the Piper didn't lead them east? What if he led them underground? Because in the next section, we explore what some believe to be true, that the children of Hamelin weren't lost to time. They were trapped, and the mountain never gave them back. The legends say the children followed the Piper into the mountains, but mountains don't have doors. Do they? Outside Hamelin, about 25 kilometers away, there's a place called Koppenberg Hill. Locals call it Koppen, and for centuries, they believed it was cursed. Not just because of what happened, but because of what was heard, and what was never found. Hikers, farmers, even priests who passed near the hill swore they heard things, muffled voices, echoes, flute music, children's laughter carried by wind where there were no children. They said the grass wouldn't grow on one side of the hill, that animals refused to go near the base, that a tunnel once existed there and then vanished. There is a small plaque nearby. It reads, Here, the children of Hamelin were lost. But lost where? Let me tell you a theory. Not popular, not academic, but chilling. Some believe the mountain opened, literally, that a landslide or sinkhole or something unnatural split the earth, and the piper, whatever or whoever he was, led the children inside, into caves, tunnels, a world beneath the one we know. This isn't fantasy. Germany is filled with underground systems, salt mines, limestone caverns, war bunkers. Some extend for miles, and more than once in history, people have vanished into them. In the late 1500s, a group of workers near the Harz Mountains unearthed a chamber with old clothing, child-sized shoes, dozens of them. They sealed it without explanation. In 1878, a shepherd claimed to see a boy in strange clothes stumble from a hillside near Hamelin, dazed, speaking a forgotten dialect. The boy vanished before authorities could question him. Locals called it a ghost. But what if it wasn't? What if the children didn't die? What if they lived, trapped in a labyrinth no one else could find? Generations later, the town forgot them, covered the entrances, changed the stories, built homes over hollow ground. And the piper? Maybe he wasn't a man at all. Maybe he was something older, a spirit, a symbol, or worse, a guardian of something buried, a collector. Because stories of music leading people into mountains are not unique to Hamelin. In Austrian folklore, there's the legend of the Earl King, a supernatural being who lures children away with promises and song. In Swiss myth, the Bergmen line are gnome-like miners who play flutes to enchant wanderers and trap them underground. Even in Native American legends, music from hills and caves often represents the call of the dead, or the trick of something ancient, something hungry. So what if the Pied Piper wasn't German? What if he wasn't human? What if Hamelin, in its greed, broke a pact with something they didn't understand? Something that once protected them. Something they betrayed. And the price was 130 children. To be clear, this theory is not widely accepted. It sounds unbelievable. But let's be honest. Nothing about this story has ever made sense. Not the timing, not the silence, not the memory that's lasted longer than the event itself. Because when something unnatural happens, people don't forget. They cover, they whisper, they build legends, and they warn. So the next time you hear a tune in the wind or feel drawn toward a dark opening in the rock, remember this. The children of Hamelin weren't just lost, they were taken. And in the final section, we confront the one question no one in Hamelin ever dared to ask out loud. What if he comes back? The year is no longer 1284. Hamelin is now a picturesque tourist town with souvenir shops, guided tours, and cheerful murals of a man in a funny hat playing a flute. Children pose for photos beneath statues. People laugh. They've turned the story into a fairy tale. But what if it was never meant to be sweet? What if every smiling painting hides a warning? Let's remember what we know. A real event took place in 1284, where 130 children disappeared from Hamelin. A stained glass window from that very century confirmed it. No mention of rats existed in early records. No bodies were ever found. And to this day, Hamelin does not celebrate on the date of their disappearance. A street in the town still forbids music, not because of law, but because of fear. Some say the children were victims of disease, or ran off to start colonies, or were taken underground. But maybe that's not the scariest part. Maybe the real horror is that no one stopped it. They let the piper play. They watched their children walk away, and they said nothing, because maybe they couldn't stop it, or maybe they wouldn't. And maybe, even now, we all hear the same song, different notes, same melody. When we ignore the cries of the young, when we choose greed over promises, when we silence the truth because it's more convenient to rewrite the story. Because the piper isn't just a character, he's a mirror. He appears when we break our word. He returns when we forget the cost of betrayal. And if he came once, he could come again. And next time it might not be Hamelin. It might be here. It might be us. So if one day you hear music when no one is playing, and your children begin to follow something you can't see, ask yourself, not where he's going, but what deal was broken this time? Like, comment, subscribe. For more stories like this, where history whispers through legend and truth hides in plain sight, Uncle Luke tells.